What would you do if the ring on a little black girl's finger, one she thought belonged to her late mother, turned out to be the key to unraveling a billion-dollar empire built on stolen children, secret experiments, and a legacy of silence? In the middle of a blazing southern road, a 10-year-old girl stops to help a stranded millionaire fix his broken Mustang. He laughs until he sees the ring. Within seconds, his entire past crashes into the present. What begins as a simple act of kindness becomes the spark that ignites a global movement. She has no idea she's the child they've been trying to erase for over a decade. This is not just a story about technology or power or corruption. This is the story of a girl who inherited a lie and turned it into a revolution. Stay with us to witness how a forgotten promise, a hidden chip, and a girl with grease-streaked hands brought the truth to light and built a future they never saw coming. Because some stories don't end in silence, they begin with one whisper and burn the world down to rebuild it better. Under the oppressive heat of a southern afternoon in rural North Carolina, the cracked asphalt shimmered like glass beneath the blistering sun, and the only sound along the deserted road was the faint hum of cicadas and the soft, rhythmic crunch of worn sneakers on gravel. 10-year-old Zara Mitchell adjusted the straps of her fraying backpack, which bounced lightly against her back with every step, and wiped the sweat from her brow with the edge of an oversized t-shirt that bore the faded logo of MIT, a hand-me-down from her late mother, now cherished like armor. The walk from her school to the small home she shared with her Aunt Tasha and Uncle Calvin was usually uneventful a time for silent daydreams and mental puzzles. But today something out of place caught her sharp eye. A striking red Mustang Shelby GT 500 parked crookedly along the roadside. Its hood popped open like a mouth gasping for breath. And beside it, a man in a suit, pacing like a caged animal, waving his phone through the air like it was a sword in battle. The man's pale skin was flushed and slick with sweat, and though she was too far away to hear his words, his body language radiated fury and impatience. Zara slowed her gaze, narrowing. The car was a marvel, all power and polish, but it was clearly in distress just like its owner. She considered moving along. Aunt Tasha had always warned her about strangers, especially ones who didn't belong in their quiet, mostly black community on the outskirts of Charlotte. But there was something in the man's posture, something in the way he stared helplessly under the hood, that pulled at Zara's instincts, the same instincts that told her how to fix broken circuits or diagnose faulty engines by sound alone. Her fingers brushed against the metal edge of the small toolkit inside her backpack, a gift from Uncle Calvin, a retired mechanic who had once told her, "Understanding machines is like understanding people. You listen first." She stepped closer, cautious but curious. "Excuse me, sir," she called out gently, her voice steady, despite the weight of the moment. The man turned, startled. He looked to be in his 40s, tall and broad-shouldered, with lines etched deep into his forehead and a glint of desperation in his eyes. The expensive cut of his navy suit contrasted sharply with the dusty surroundings, and the gold watch on his wrist gleamed in the sun like a warning signal. "Need some help with your car," Zara offered, standing a few feet away, with one hand still on her backpack strap. For a moment the man simply stared at her, confusion giving way to condescension as his gaze took in her skinny frame, the scuffed sneakers, the MIT shirt hanging off her like a flag from another world. "That's very kind of you, sweetheart," he said with a tight smile, his voice lined with tension. "But this is a high-performance engine. I need a real mechanic, not a science fair volunteer." Zara didn't flinch. She simply shrugged and stepped forward another pace. "My uncle's a mechanic. Taught me since I could walk. I can at least take a look." Before he could object, she dropped her backpack to the ground with a soft thud and unzipped it to reveal a neatly arranged set of tools, each one worn but cared for. Each one a testament to the hours she had spent learning the language of combustion and coolant. Without waiting for permission, she peered into the open hood, scanning the components with a practiced eye. The man, bewildered, ran a hand through his hair. "Fine," he muttered, "not like I've got any better options." Zara ignored the skepticism and got to work. "When did it start acting up?" she asked, her tone clinical. "About 40 minutes ago," the man replied. "The engine started to overheat, then just died. No warning, smelled anything sweet." "What?" "Like syrup." "Did you smell anything like that?" The man blinked. "Now that you mention it, yeah, I did. Briefly coolant leak," Zara said with quiet certainty. She pointed to a faint puddle under the front of the car, shimmering in the heat. "You're losing antifreeze. That's why it overheated." The man's mouth opened slightly as if to ask how she knew, but the words never came. He watched in silence as she dug into her kit, pulled out a small roll of reinforced radiator tape, and knelt to access the hose. Her hands moved with remarkable precision for someone so young, and every motion was executed with clarity, confidence, and grace. "This should hold until you get to town," she said, wiping her forehead again. "But you'll need to refill the coolant." The man stared, something shifting in his expression. Something less like disbelief and more like recognition. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice lower. Now measured, Zara Mitchell. She extended a grease-streaked hand which he shook with a curious hesitance. "Logan Price," he replied. And in that moment everything in Logan's world began to tilt. It was the ring. As Zara raised her hand to tie her braids back with a rubber band, sunlight caught on the emerald green stone, set in antique gold on her finger, too large for her secured with a coil of thread. The ring shimmered, reflecting a crescent-shaped flaw in the gem, a flaw Logan would recognize anywhere, a flaw he hadn't seen in over a decade. He froze. Time seemed to slow, the sounds of the world dimming around him. That ring, he had given it once long ago to a little girl at Starlight Haven Orphanage days before it was shut down in a storm of secrecy. That ring, Logan began, his throat tightening, is very unusual. Zara glanced down at it, then back at him. "It was my mom's," she said quietly. "My adoptive mom, Elena. She died last year." A shadow fell across her face, and Logan felt. It felt the grief, the loss, the connection. "She said it symbolized a promise," Zara added. "Did she ever say where she got it?" "No," Zara replied, shaking her head. "Only that it came from someone special. That one day I'd understand." Logan's chest constricted. Could it really be? Had fate or guilt led him back to the child he had abandoned, the promise he had broken? He looked at her again, really looked, the fierce intelligence in her eyes, the calm determination in her movements. And he knew. He didn't know how or why or what had brought her back into his life on this forgotten road. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. This girl was not just another Good Samaritan. She was the key to a past he thought was buried. A past that now threatened to rise with a vengeance. "Would you let me give you a ride home?" he asked, his voice trembling beneath the surface. Zara hesitated, then nodded. "Okay, but it's not far." As the Mustang roared to life again, still limping but functional, Zara buckled into the passenger seat, unaware that this short ride would be the beginning of an odyssey. Logan stole glances at her as they drove, every answer she gave to his casual questions, tightening the noose of realization around his throat. When she mentioned Starlight Haven by name, he nearly swerved off the road. "Do you know it?" she asked. Logan swallowed hard. "I did. A long time ago." When they pulled up to the modest bungalow at the end of a quiet lane, Logan didn't want to let her go. He reached into his wallet and handed her a business card. "If you ever need anything, Zara, anything, you call me." She took the card with a raised brow, tucked it into her bag, and thanked him. He watched as she skipped toward the porch, the ring catching one last flicker of light. He didn't drive away. Not immediately. His hands trembled on the steering wheel as he called. "Ramirez, I need everything you can find," he said. "Elena Mitchell, Zara Mitchell, Starlight Haven, now." And as he hung up, Logan Price realized that the past wasn't done with him. Not yet. What he didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that the little girl who had once been just a memory was about to unearth a secret so powerful it could dismantle empires, expose crimes masked by wealth, and ignite a reckoning 12 years in the making. The gears of destiny had begun to turn, and at the center of it all was a child with oil-streaked fingers, a mind like no other, and a ring that had never stopped waiting. Logan Price didn't sleep that night. Long after the sun had set over Charlotte's distant skyline, long after the voices in his head had gone hoarse from whispering old regrets, he sat alone in his private study, staring at a photograph of the ring, an enlarged high-resolution image sent by Ramirez just hours after their call. In the photo, the emerald stone seemed to pulse with something more than light. It shimmered with memory, betrayal, and the unbearable weight of a promise never kept. 12 years ago, Logan had knelt on the floor of the Starlight Haven orphanage, his hand trembling as he slipped the ring onto the finger of a 3-year-old girl with piercing, thoughtful eyes. She hadn't cried, not even as he whispered, "I'll be back for you." And then he hadn't. The ring was supposed to be a symbol of hope, a promise between him and a child he had fully intended to adopt, until his father, Richard Price, had pulled the plug on the entire operation. The orphanage closed within days. Logan had searched for a while, but then the board handed him a promotion. The press demanded appearances. His father demanded loyalty. And life, as it often does for those with privilege and power, provided endless distractions from conscience. Until now. The next morning, Logan sat across from Ramirez in a secure downtown office, thick files spread across a mahogany table like crime scene evidence. Her mother, Zara Mitchell, was registered as a nurse at Starlight Haven. Ramirez began flipping open a manila folder, went off the grid shortly before the facility was shut down. She reappeared 6 months later in a town 2 hours south under a new name. Bought a trailer, enrolled a child named Zara Mitchell in public school. No birth certificate, no adoption records. Officially, the child didn't exist. Logan's heart thudded dully, and Elena Ramirez hesitated. Died last year, car crash. Brakes failed. Local PD marked it as mechanical failure, but the autopsy report was incomplete. No toxicology, and her phone and laptop were never recovered. Logan rubbed his face, the weight of a dozen lies settling on his shoulders like armor that no longer protected. "What about the orphanage itself?" he asked quietly. Starlight Haven Ramirez pulled out another document, bought for pennies on the dollar by Price Dynamics Real Estate Holdings. My father, Logan, muttered, "Figures." "That's not the worst of it," Ramirez said, lowering his voice. "There's evidence your father funneled money through shell companies to silence whistleblowers. And one more thing. There's a name circled in the orphanage transfer logs, Zara Mitchell, red ink. Beside it, a note, special case, direct to RP. And then that's your father's initials." Logan stared at the page as the world around him darkened. A red circle, a child's name, like a target drawn in permanent ink. "I need to talk to him," Logan said at last. "Today?" Later that afternoon, Logan arrived at the Price family estate, a palatial brick fortress hidden behind electric gates and 3 layers of security cameras. Inside, the temperature was cold, not just from air conditioning, but from the absence of love. Richard Price was in the conservatory trimming orchids, as if cultivating delicate flowers could somehow absolve decades of destruction. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" he asked, without looking up. "Zara Mitchell," Logan said. The shears paused mid-air. "You remember her, don't you?" Richard straightened slowly. "Is that a name I should recognize? She was at Starlight Haven. You shut it down, covered your tracks, buried her." "Ah," Richard said, his tone icy. That one," Logan's voice cracked. "She was 3 years old. She was valuable," Richard replied. "Her cognition tests were off the charts. Pattern recognition, mechanical comprehension. She wasn't just gifted, she was singular." "You saw her as property," Logan spat. "As an asset I saw potential," Richard said, stepping closer, and so did the military. "You think I built this empire on real estate alone? Some of our most lucrative patents came from analyzing those children's brains. Neural maps, reflex speed, genetic profiles." Logan reeled. "You experimented on them, we studied them," Richard corrected, with discretion, with purpose. And Elena Logan pressed. "What happened to her?" "She stole from me," Richard said simply. "And thieves, no matter how noble they believe their intentions, pay consequences." Logan took a step back, shaking with the effort not to strike his father. "You knew I cared about her. You knew I was going to adopt that child, which is why I shut it down," Richard said, eyes burning with a ruthless gleam. "You were getting weak, emotional. That girl would have derailed everything. But now, perhaps it's time we reclaim what's ours." Logan stared at him. "She's not yours, she never was." Richard smirked. "Then prove it." As Logan turned to leave, his phone buzzed with a new message. A video file from Ramirez. It was blurry at first, security footage from 12 years ago, time-stamped just hours before Starlight Haven closed. It showed a nurse, Elena, running through to the back exit, clutching a small child wrapped in a blanket. Behind her, 2 men in black chased with walkie-talkies and tasers. One shouted, "She's taking subject 17." The video ended in static. Subject 17, Zara Mitchell. A girl marked for manipulation before she could even spell her name. A girl whose life had been rewritten by men in suits. Logan closed his eyes, a single thought echoing in his skull. You promised you'd come back for her. And now the universe had delivered her back, smarter, stronger, and unknowingly in possession of a secret that could dismantle an empire. The question was no longer what happened, but what happens now. Logan knew his next move wouldn't just define his own legacy. It would decide whether Zara grew up safe or disappeared like so many others. The air in the Mitchell household that evening was unusually still. The cicadas had quieted outside and inside. The only sound was the soft ticking of the wall clock, as if time itself was holding its breath. Zara sat cross-legged on the floor of the workshop, behind the house, soldering a loose wire into the back panel of a 1950s shortwave radio, the kind with chrome dials and a faux wood casing. Her fingers moved nimbly, her expression focused, but her thoughts wandered again and again to the man from the road, Logan Price. There was something about the way he had looked at her ring, not with admiration or curiosity, but with panic, like it was a ghost come to life. The ring now felt heavier on her finger. She spun it absently as she worked, not noticing Uncle Calvin stepping into the doorway until he spoke. "Did you fix it?" Zara looked up and smiled, holding up the radio. "It's alive again. Just needed a new capacitor and some patience." Calvin chuckled, walking over and gently ruffling her braids. "You've got a gift, girl. Never seen anyone understand machines like you." Zara hesitated. "Uncle, do you think Mom would be proud of me?" Calvin's smile faded, replaced by something softer, more fragile. "Elena would have been over the moon. You were her whole world." Zara glanced down at the ring. "I met someone yesterday. His car broke down, and I fixed it. He saw this, and he changed, like really changed. He gave me his card." She handed it over. Calvin's face drained of color the moment he read the name Logan Price. His fingers trembled as he passed the card to Tasha, who had appeared silently in the doorway. "It's happening," Calvin whispered. "It's really happening." "Zara, sweetheart," Tasha said gently, her voice tight. "Remember when we told you we'd tell you the truth about your mom?" "When the time was right," Zara nodded slowly. "We think that time has come," Tasha said, exchanging a grave glance with Calvin. They led her inside to the old cedar chest that sat under the altar shelf, where a candle still burned each evening for Elena. From beneath folded quilts and photo albums, Tasha retrieved a sealed yellowed envelope. On the front, in Elena's careful handwriting, were the words, "For Zara." "Only if someone from the Price family ever finds her." Zara took the letter with trembling hands and sat on the edge of the sofa. She unfolded it slowly, the crackle of ancient paper seeming to echo through the room. The words inside were written with clarity, sorrow, and fierce love. "My dearest Zara, if you are reading this, someone has found you. That means it's time you know the truth. You were born in a place called Starlight Haven, but it was never a haven at all. It was a project, a laboratory with cribs. They studied you and others like you, tested your reflexes, measured your reactions. You weren't a child to them. You were data. I was a nurse there, and I fell in love with your mind before I even knew your name. You solved puzzles faster than I could reset them. You instinctively reached for broken objects and made them whole when I discovered what they really planned to do with you. I changed our names. We hid. I knew they'd never stop looking. But if someone from the Price family has come, it means the system is moving again, and you must be ready. Inside the ring is something they want. A storage device. I embedded with help from a friend. It contains everything. Their research, their lies, their names. It's your weapon. Zara, use it wisely and never forget. You are not what they made you. You are who you choose to be. Love, always, Mom. Tears blurred Zara's vision, but her hands remained steady. The words on the page felt like a key turning in a lock she hadn't known existed. She looked at the ring, then back at her aunt and uncle. "You knew?" Calvin nodded, his face creased with guilt. "We promised Elena to keep you safe, to wait until the danger came." Knocking Zara's voice was barely a whisper, and it just knocked. At that very moment, in a luxury penthouse across Charlotte, Logan Price stood with Ramirez on the balcony, the city lights glittering behind them like a million surveillance cameras. "I don't just want a name," Logan said. "I want evidence, everything, every transfer, every test, every child. You'll have it. Ramirez replied. But someone else is sniffing around too. A journalist, Julian Carter, former investigative reporter for the Charlotte Sentinel. Fired 3 years ago for digging into Starlight Haven. He's back. Logan's brow furrowed. What does he know? Enough to be dangerous, Ramirez said. And he's close to Calvin and Tasha Mitchell. He's been visiting that town quietly for weeks. Logan sighed. Then we need to move faster. If my father gets wind of this. He trailed off. If he gets wind, Ramirez finished, he'll make her disappear, just like the others. Across town, under the eerie glow of a street lamp, a black SUV idled near the entrance to Zara's school. Inside, 2 men in suits flipped through a file folder containing photos of a young girl with braids and an emerald ring. Is that her? One asked. Confirm the other, said Mr. Price. Senior wants her brought in, quietly. What neither of them noticed was the old pickup truck parked across the street, headlights off engine. Silent. Inside, Calvin watched with narrowed eyes, phone in hand. He scrolled to the last number Elena had ever written down on paper. He hit call. The voice that answered was tired, gruff, and cautious. Julian Carter, it said. Calvin's voice shook. It's about Starlight Haven, and the girl with the ring. I've found her, and I have the proof you were looking for. The lines were forming. The players were in motion, and the war for Zara. Mitchell's life, the battle between empire and truth, had just begun. The next morning began, like any other, for the executives of Price Dynamics Group. Suits filed into glass elevators, morning coffees in hand. Their minds focused on stock forecasts and quarterly targets. But on the 50th floor in a private boardroom, sealed from casual eyes, tension brewed thick as diesel in a locked garage. Logan Price sat alone at the head of the obsidian conference table, the morning light filtering through floor-to-ceiling windows behind him, casting long shadows that seemed to reach for his shoulders like accusations. Before him lay an open laptop and a manila folder containing secrets so poisonous they could collapse the foundation of everything the Price family had built for over 3 decades. He didn't flinch as the heavy doors opened and Richard Price strode in, flanked by 2 legal advisors and the subtle stench of generational arrogance. Why am I here? Logan Richard asked, folding his arms. This better not be another tantrum about that orphanage. We buried that mess over a decade ago. Logan looked up calm, but cold. You didn't bury it? You sealed it like a tomb. But it's cracking now, and the dead are crawling out. Richard blinked once, amused. Is that supposed to scare me? No. Logan said, pressing a key on the laptop. The wall screen came to life. What played next drained the smirk from Richard's face. Surveillance footage, grainy but damning, of Elena Mitchell running through the night with a bundled child in her arms. Guards shouting tasers, raised one, yelling, subject. 17 is fleeing. Then came a series of scans, neural response tests, cognition diagnostics, all labeled with a code that matched the red-inked note Ramirez had found. RP-17 Zara Mitchell. That footage is protected, Richard said, his voice sharp. Classified under federal contracts. Not anymore, Logan replied. Because I made a deal with the Department of Justice, full cooperation, full disclosure. A woman stepped into the room behind him, Nina Roberts, federal prosecutor. She nodded once silently, placing a badge and folder onto the table. Richard's jaw clenched. You brought in the feds. You forced me to. Logan said. You experimented on children. Dad. You tracked them, tagged them, some of them disappeared. Elena Mitchell is dead, and her daughter Zara is being hunted by men in black SUVs like she's an escaped lab rat. You don't understand what's at stake, Richard growled. We're on the cusp of patents that could reshape national defense biotech applications derived from cognitive anomalies, mechanical synesthesia, preternatural instinct. These children were never ordinary. They were assets. And now, one of them has resurfaced with something that belongs to us. What she has, Nina interrupted, is legally hers. The device inside her ring holds documents, encrypted recordings, and evidence of systemic abuse, falsified adoptions, and bribed officials. And it's being duplicated as we speak. Richard turned to Logan, eyes blazing. You betrayed your bloodline for what? A broken promise. A girl who barely knows your name. Logan stood jaw tight. I made a promise to her before you stole everything. Before I became you. And I intend to keep it. Downstairs, the lobby buzzed as Julian Carter walked in through the revolving doors, flanked by Uncle Calvin and a girl who seemed too small for the storm that swirled around her. Zara Mitchell, in a simple denim jacket and her MIT shirt, clutched her backpack tightly. Her fingers wrapped around the band of thread that kept her ring in place, but her eyes, those sharp, unblinking eyes, burned with something deeper than fear. They burned with intent. As they stepped into the elevator, Calvin handed her a folded sheet of paper. "From your mom," he whispered. "She said this day might come." On the ride up, Julian adjusted the camera in his satchel. "The live stream is ready. If anything goes wrong, the world will see it." Zara nodded, once her mind reciting the words from Elena's letter like a mantra. "You are not what they made you. You are who you choose to be." Back in the boardroom, Richard paced like a cornered wolf. "We can spin this," he hissed to his lawyers. "We can kill the feed, discredit the source." The doors burst open. Zara stepped in. The room fell silent. She walked forward, the overhead lights reflecting off the emerald in her ring. Logan's eyes softened. "You didn't have to come." "Yes, I did," Zara said, her voice firm and clear. "Because she died protecting the truth, and I won't let you bury it again." Richard turned slowly to face her eyes, narrowing. "So, you're subject 17. I expected someone taller." Zara didn't blink. "And you're the man who killed my mother." A sharp intake of breath echoed through the room. Richard's lip curled. "You have no idea what you're talking about." "Her brakes didn't fail by chance," Zara said. "And I can prove it." She pulled the ring off her finger and twisted the stone. A hidden compartment clicked open, revealing a microchip the size of a fingernail. She placed it on the table. "This contains copies of all the Starlight data. Every test, every experiment, every recorded meeting with military contractors, including the one where you call me military-grade potential. On 6 spar. Julian, already recording, moved to get a clearer angle. Nina spoke into her comms. "Go live. Now." The feed surged to the cloud. Viewers around the country began tuning in, first hundreds, then thousands, then millions. Richard lunged for the device, but Logan caught his arm. "It's over, Dad." "No," Richard snarled. "This is treason." "No," Nina replied. "This is justice." Federal agents stormed the room. Richard was handcuffed as the live feed captured his expression, somewhere between rage and disbelief. "I built this empire," he shouted, "and you let a child destroy it." "She didn't destroy it," Logan said quietly. "She gave us a reason to rebuild." Zara stepped forward, her voice barely above a whisper. "My mom used to say machines can be fixed, but broken people, they have to choose to fix themselves." Richard stared at her, stunned into silence for the first time in his life. As he was led away, the media storm erupted. Price Dynamics' stock plummeted within hours. Whistleblowers came forward. Satellite offices shut down. The empire cracked brick by brick, secret by secret. And at the center of it all stood a 10-year-old girl. A ring. And the truth. As the news rippled across the nation, like a shockwave detonated at the core of corporate America, Zara Mitchell sat quietly in the back seat of Uncle Calvin's truck, the fading sunlight slanting across her face as they drove away from the towering headquarters of Price Dynamics, now swarmed by federal vehicles, news vans, and protesters wielding signs that shouted for justice, transparency, and retribution. But the girl at the center of it all remained silent, her fingers gently brushing the spot on her hand, where the ring had rested like a memory, like a secret guardian, and now like a weapon finally discharged. She didn't cry, didn't speak, didn't tremble, because something deeper than emotion anchored her in that moment, purpose, identity, and the sobering weight of inherited trauma transmuted into strength. But the silence didn't last long, because the world had questions, and the world doesn't wait for little girls to catch their breath. Not when empires crumble, and names like Richard Price, once heralded as a titan of innovation, now appeared in headlines alongside words like exploitation, human experimentation, and criminal conspiracy, and not when a child. Black female and brilliant stood at the center of the revelation, unraveling the gilded lies woven over decades by power-drunk men in tailored suits, while inside, the Department of Justice. Nina Roberts prepared the formal charges with a calm that belied the historic weight of the moment. 43 counts of unlawful experimentation on minors, 12 counts of obstruction of justice, 9 of conspiracy to defraud the government, and more. Waiting redacted files still being reviewed, but all of it grounded in the evidence extracted from that tiny chip concealed in a girl's ring. A ring that Zara Mitchell had engineered with tools hidden under a floorboard and encrypted with knowledge passed down like an heirloom of resistance because she had known somehow instinctively that the day would come when Zara would have to face the ghosts that had haunted her since birth. And now she had not only faced them, she had forced them into the light of day where even the most expensive lawyers couldn't make them disappear. Meanwhile, Logan Price, no longer CEO, no longer heir to an empire built on lies, stood on the steps of the courthouse. No security detail, no entourage, just a man stripped bare before the public, his hands shaking slightly as he addressed the throng of microphones, his voice raw with remorse but steady with resolve. I was complicit in silence, and for that I will spend the rest of my life trying to make things right. I've donated my entire personal fortune to create the Polaris Initiative, a program designed to identify, support, and elevate young talent from marginalized communities. No strings, no contracts, no exploitation. And though many were skeptical, the announcement sent waves through education and philanthropy sectors, drawing cautious praise and cautious suspicion alike. Because America had seen men fall and reinvent themselves before. But what made Logan different wasn't his money. It was the quiet look in his eyes when he spoke of Zara, of Elena, of what had been lost and what might still be reclaimed. And as media cameras followed every twitch of this unfolding story, back in a quiet corner of rural North Carolina, in a patch of land where the ruins of Starlight Haven had once stood. Like a scar on the earth, bulldozers now cleared ground, not for condos or a tech campus, but for a new kind of foundation. The Mitchell Innovation Academy, a vision Zara had proposed and Logan had backed without question, a place where children like her, curious, intuitive, often overlooked, could learn, build, and rise without fear of being caged. And 5 years later, that vision had become reality, with white buildings bathed in sunlight, solar panels lining the rooftops, and the faint hum of drone workshops, code labs, and physics simulations filling the air with the sound of unapologetic hope. And at the heart of it all walked Zara now, 15 taller, sharper, but still with the same ring reforged as a pendant this time, hanging over her heart like a compass that always pointed forward. She wasn't just a student. She was a teacher, a mentor, a spark that lit fires in minds and refused to let them be dimmed by doubt. And one afternoon, as she examined a prototype drone built by a 12-year-old from Detroit who had never seen a real computer before, arriving at the academy, she turned as a familiar voice called her name. Logan, older, now, grayer, but finally at peace, stepping into the courtyard in jeans and a worn button-down, no longer a symbol of power, but of repentance. And as they walked together beneath the carved stone archway that bore the Academy's motto, "Every mind matters, every voice deserves space," he handed her a small envelope inside, which was a letter from a woman neither of them had heard from in years, Victoria Price Richards' daughter, who had changed her name and vanished into the judicial system after the fall, and now worked as a prosecutor, using the fire once lit in Zara's trial to chase systemic injustice elsewhere. And in her letter, she wrote of 5 more facilities hidden, like Starlight Haven, had been each with children who had stories, but no documents, talents, but no platform, and she closed her letter with one request. When you're ready, Zara, come meet them. They deserve to know what's possible. They deserve to meet the girl who rewrote the rules, and as Zara folded the paper heart, pounding with new purpose, she looked out across the gardens where children of every color, background, and dream chased one another beneath trees that had once been witnesses to silence. And she thought of Elena not as a victim, but as the architect of all this. And in that moment, she knew her journey was not one of vengeance, but of transformation, and that her story, once shaped by rings, lies, and broken promises, now lived as a testament that the most powerful revolutions do not begin with armies or laws, but with a girl who sees something broken and dares to fix it anyway. 5 months after the first graduation ceremony of Mitchell Innovation Academy, as the leaves in North Carolina turned a burnt orange and the wind carried the scent of copper and pine across the open fields, where children once hid from shadows now long gone, Zara Mitchell found herself alone in the east wing of the Academy's central lab, her fingers brushing lightly across a workbench cluttered with circuits, drone shells, disassembled processors, and scribbled blueprints of a new kind of sensor grid designed by a 12-year-old girl from Baltimore who had built it entirely from recycled phone parts. And as she adjusted a micro-soldering pen and leaned over to inspect a filament wire, the soft chime of a notification echoed through the steel-framed room, signaling the arrival of a secure message, which she instinctively opened without breaking her focus until the name at the top made her breath catch. Victoria Price, once the daughter of the man who'd orchestrated so much darkness, now one of the people working hardest to dismantle every legacy he left behind. And as Zara opened the attached documents, her heart pounded with recognition and dread. For inside were names children, 37 of them, from 5 previously unknown facilities scattered across Texas, Nevada, Oregon, and Illinois, each one resembling Starlight Haven in purpose and secrecy. Each one recently shut down, thanks to evidence extracted from the ring's hidden archive, and now freed from shadows. These children were beginning to speak, to learn to ask questions, and Victoria's note was simple, urgent, and clear. They've heard of you. They don't know what's possible, but you do. Will you meet them? And Zara, still only 15, closed her eyes for a moment, hearing Elena's voice not in words, but in the echoes of memory. You are not what they made you. And she knew the answer was yes, even though it scared her, even though it meant walking back into the kind of corridors where silence was used as a weapon and talent was treated like inventory. Because the truth was no longer something she ran from, it was something she carried like a torch into rooms still cloaked in dusk. Across town, in a modest 3-story building that had once served as a regional branch of Price Dynamics, before being seized by the federal government and restructured into a community-led tech incubator, Logan Price now worked shoulder to shoulder with educators, engineers, and child advocates. His days spent not in boardrooms, but in classrooms, teaching business ethics to students who challenged him at every turn. And though some still looked at him with the eyes of a man trying to redeem bloodstains with blueprint paper, most had come to understand that his penance was not performative, it was purposeful, and it had cost him everything he once valued, except for one thing: his belief that if Zara could carry the weight of a history she didn't choose, then he could carry the work of helping her build a future no one else had imagined. And it was in this spirit that he drafted a new proposal to the Mitchell Academy Board, one that would extend the school's reach into a national mentorship network, linking talented youth with leaders not as subjects to be used, but as collaborators, inventors, and citizens of the future. Back at the academy, preparations were underway for a commemorative unveiling, a sculpture to be placed at the exact center of the original Starlight Haven property line, where the old Central Hall once stood before. It was demolished brick by brick and carted away like ash from a fire, too long ignored, and Zara, having been asked to speak, spent the evening drafting her thoughts not on a screen, but by hand, the ink bleeding slightly on the paper as she wrote and rewrote a single line over and over again. We were never lost, we were hidden. And now, we are home. A line that would later be etched into stone beneath the sculpture itself. A ring of hands, small sculpted from bronze, reaching upward in a spiral, each one representing a child whose name was recovered from the lost registries, and at the apex of the spiral, an open hand with an emerald ring in its palm. The day of the unveiling, dignitaries, students, former victims, and even skeptical journalists gathered on the lawn beneath a sky that threatened rain, but held back as if out of respect. And when Zara took the stage, the crowd fell utterly silent, not because of her fame, not even because of the history she carried, but because of the calm in her voice, the quiet power in her presence, the sense that she didn't just remember what had been done, she had rewritten what came next. And as she spoke of her mother, of memory, of courage born in basements, and whispered truths, the wind lifted gently and scattered orange leaves across the marble steps, where Richard Price had once stood, demanding loyalty. And now, nothing of him remained but a name scraped from every building he once claimed. And though he still sat in a federal prison 1,000 miles away, unrepentant and unread, his empire was gone, not with a crash, but with a choice, a decision by a young girl not to destroy, but to rebuild. That evening, as the ceremony ended and the stars came out one by one, like timid witnesses returning to a stage long darkened, Zara sat alone on the sculpture's edge, her legs swinging slightly as she looked out across the property that had once been her prison and was now her sanctuary. And beside her, Logan sat down quietly, not speaking until she turned and asked, Do you ever think it'll stop feeling like a story that wasn't supposed to happen? And he smiled gently, not with pride, but with awe, and said, I think it feels exactly like the story that was always waiting to be written. It just needed the right author. And she nodded, placing a hand over the ring now, resting against her chest, and whispered, Then I guess we better keep writing. As dawn broke over the Mitchell Innovation Academy, casting amber streaks across the dew-speckled glass of the east wing, and illuminating the names etched into the black stone wall, outside the names of the lost, the found, and the unforgotten. Zara Mitchell stood barefoot in the central courtyard, eyes closed, hands clasped behind her back, listening not to sound, but to silence, the kind of silence that follows a storm and feels sacred, earned not passive, but powerful. Because this was no longer the silence of secrecy, but of reflection of breath before motion, and as students began to stir in the dorms, filing out for morning workshops and mentoring sessions, many paused upon seeing her there, their whispers soft with reverence. Not because she had become a symbol, but because she had remained human, fallible, kind. And now, as the 7th class of admissions prepared to enter a space once scorched by surveillance and turned into sanctuary, Zara opened her eyes and turned toward the administrative building, where Uncle Calvin and Julian Carter were waiting for her with a printed report clutched tightly between them, one that detailed a recent audit of an abandoned warehouse in northern Illinois, believed to be one of the final black site facilities used by Price Dynamics before its collapse, and inside forensic teams had discovered fragments of children's belongings, schematics of modified neural mapping devices. And most haunting of all, a wall covered in photos, dozens of children, some named many. Not all of them, processed, cataloged, and disappeared. And at the center of that wall, circled in red ink, like a target from the past, was the same photo of Zara, at age 3, taken just days before. Elena fled with her into the night. And though the air in the room grew heavy as she read, Zara didn't flinch. Because pain no longer surprised her, it had simply become a tool. She had learned to shape like metal under heat, forging resolve where others expected fragility. And as she tucked the report into her binder and thanked them both, she said, Then it's time we meet the ones who never got a chance to run. And by afternoon, a convoy of 3 academy vehicles set out toward the interstate, heading to a private rehabilitation center, now housing 19 of those recovered from the Illinois site, children who had been found living in shadow, some mute, some malnourished, all brilliant in ways the world had never been allowed to see. And as they drove, Zara prepared not a speech, not a strategy, but a question, because this meeting wasn't about her saving anyone. It was about listening. And when they arrived, the air was thick with tension. The staff unsure of how to introduce the girl, who had become a movement to those still trapped between silence and language. But the moment one small boy with copper skin and unblinking eyes spotted the ring on her necklace and whispered, That's the same one she had. Everything shifted because recognition is the first step to trust. And from there came nods, then steps, then hesitant conversations. And by evening, Zara sat cross-legged on the floor of a rec room with 5 children beside her, all of them sketching circuits and questions in chalk on the tiles, their drawings overlapping like a map of possibility. And when one girl named Alora asked, Did you ever feel like you didn't belong in the world they gave you? Zara smiled softly and answered, Every day. But that's how I knew I was meant to build a different one. And across the city, in the office of a newly appointed DOJ task force, Victoria Price reviewed Zara's proposal for a national archive, one that would collect testimonies, drawings, inventions, and stories from every child. Once processed through the Price system, not as evidence, but as a declaration of existence, a testament that none of them would be forgotten again. And she signed the approval order with a single line, Let the future know their names. And within weeks, the Children of Code Archive launched in partnership with public libraries open to students, teachers, journalists, and anyone willing to understand the price of silence and the power of survival. And back at the academy, as fall turned to winter, Zara returned from her visits to oversee the launch of a new lab, one designed not for instruction, but for experimentation, a space where failure was not penalized, but celebrated, because she believed that resilience was forged not in success, but in the ability to begin again. And one evening, as Logan Price stood beside her during a tour with a group of global educators watching a young girl rebuild a robotic limb from discarded bicycle parts, he turned to Zara and said, Do you realize what you've done? and she replied without looking up. I haven't done anything alone, that's the whole point. And when the international press arrived to cover the Academy's expansion into 3 new states, Zara declined to sit for interviews, choosing instead to feature the voices of students like Jaden, a 15-year-old with a gift for magnetic field manipulation, and Miko, a blind coder from Oklahoma, who had built an auditory AI system that mapped rooms and sound pulses, because Zara's revolution was never about her. It was about what was possible when belief met opportunity. And as the Academy held its first ever global virtual showcase, streamed in 6 languages and watched by over 2 million people, the final speaker of the night, Zara Mitchell, standing at the base of the sculpture with the spiral of hands, looked into the camera and said, "What was meant to be our prison became our foundation. What was meant to silence us became our signal. And the truth they tried to erase is now the blueprint for everything we're building next." And as her voice faded into applause somewhere in a quiet cell in Oregon, Richard Price watched on a flickering television, his eyes hollow, his name erased from every plaque, every deed, every legacy. He thought unbreakable, and though no one outside that prison paid him much attention anymore, the irony was unmistakable. The system he built to control had birthed the very leader who undid him. And the girl he once labeled as Subject 17 had become the voice of a new age, not of vengeance, but of vision. The winter wind swept through the North Carolina foothills like an old spirit coming home, rattling bare branches and whistling across the rooftops of the Mitchell Innovation Academy. But inside the walls of the main auditorium, where warm light poured from suspended glass orbs and rows of students sat shoulder to shoulder on modular benches, silence reigned not from fear or command, but from reverence, because today was not a lesson nor a celebration. It was a reckoning dressed in truth. And Zara Mitchell now, 16, stood center stage without notes, without screens. Only the faint gleam of the emerald ring at her collarbone and the unshakable stillness of someone who had learned to carry a storm without letting it tear her apart. And before her were not just her peers and teachers, but representatives from the United Nations, from the Department of Education, from countries who had once dismissed her as a fluke of fate, but now looked to her as a blueprint for the future. And as her voice filled the room, low, calm, unhurried, she spoke not of herself, but of the 27 new children recovered over the past 3 months from international facilities linked to Price Dynamics' foreign partners. Facilities that mirrored the same architectural patterns, psychological protocols, and data encryption systems used in Starlight Haven. And as images flashed silently on the wall behind her, faces of children with bruised arms, hollow stares, and hands that still instinctively shielded their creations from being stolen, Zara did not cry because tears were not her weapon. Clarity was, and when she said, "You don't build justice by punishing monsters, you build it by protecting the magic they tried to harvest." No one moved, not even the photographers. As though the air itself had been suspended in meaning and seated in the front row, Logan Price lowered his gaze, his fingers twitching slightly against the folded letter in his lap. A message from an anonymous whistleblower who had once been his father's personal advisor, detailing how Project Helix, a secretive offshore initiative, had already begun to reform under new shell corporations. And when he handed the letter to Zara after the assembly, she did not ask for time to process. She asked for a map and a plan, because the truth about revolutions is that they are never finished. Only paused between chapters, and that night in the Academy's secure data lab, she and a team of 5 teenage engineers began cross-referencing satellite records, shipping logs and AI-scrubbed communication trails to identify the next layer of shadows. And while outside, the media framed her as a prodigy, inside she worked like a soldier, sleepless focused, burning with a quiet fury, born not from vengeance but responsibility. Because each child still in captivity was a life waiting to be rewritten, and the ring, her mother's last legacy, was now more than a vault of evidence. It had become a master key to their patterns, their logic, their arrogance, and at dawn, when the first trace led them to a nondescript facility in the outskirts of Reykjavik, Zara didn't hesitate. She assembled a travel team and contacted Victoria Price, whose federal badge had opened more doors in the last year than she cared to admit. And though haunted by her name, Victoria answered without hesitation. "Send me coordinates and the data logs. I'll get clearance within the hour," because both women knew the stakes and both carried scars that didn't fade with headlines or ceremonies. And when the Academy issued its first official field mission, protocol signed by both the Department of Justice and a newly formed International Ethics Consortium, Zara refused the private jet offered and instead chose a military medical plane, faster, unbranded, and symbolic, because this was not a parade. This was a rescue. And as the flight crossed the Atlantic, she reviewed files, memorized floor plans, and adjusted her tone for the interrogation that would come not from armed guards, but from the children inside who would ask, "Why should we trust you?" And she would not answer with titles or accolades. She would show them her ring and say, "Because I was you." And in Reykjavik, as the wind howled and the team breached the cold steel gates of a hidden compound beneath a geothermal testing center, they found 21 children locked in a luminous lab, each one surrounded by whiteboards, wires, and equations, written in languages they were never taught but instinctively understood. And when Zara stepped into that space flanked by Victoria and a medic with trembling hands, one boy of no more than 8 looked up and said, "You're the one from the drawing." And when she asked what drawing, he pointed to a folded paper beneath his cot, and inside was a charcoal sketch, rough but unmistakable, of her face, the ring, and a caption beneath, in block letters, "She came back." And at that moment, every guard, every camera, every memory of fear crumbled beneath the avalanche of hope. And Zara did not break down. She did not fall to her knees. She simply knelt beside the boy, placed the ring in his small hand, and whispered, "This doesn't belong to me anymore. It belongs to you." And outside, as the sun rose over the ice fields and the compound's servers were seized, Zara sent one message to her team at the Academy: "We've cracked the next layer. Begin phase 2. This isn't just a rescue, it's an awakening." By the time Zara Mitchell returned to American soil, the world had already shifted again, not with a roar, but with a ripple, the kind that begins quietly in a child's drawing, then echoes across satellite transmissions, courtrooms, classrooms, and coded whispers from whistleblowers who had once been part of the machine but were now stepping forward, their voices trembling but real. And as the video of her in that Icelandic facility kneeling before a boy with frostbitten hands, placing the emerald ring in his palm, circulated through every major outlet and over 40 million views online, within 72 hours, the narrative changed from one of survival to resistance, from victimhood to blueprint. And for the first time in history, governments that had once shrugged at Price Dynamics' offshore assets were now facing diplomatic inquests, lawsuits, and full-scale investigations into their quiet complicity. But none of this stopped the counterforces already in motion. Because truth, when unleashed, does not walk alone. It drags shadows into light, including those who still believed that children could be cataloged, studied, weaponized, and forgotten. And so, when a digital attack shut down 3 of the Mitchell Academy's sister servers in New York, Austin, and Oakland, within the same hour, Zara didn't panic. She had been expecting the backlash, and long before any network was hit, she had built redundancies, off-grid backups, and quantum encryption that didn't just protect data, it mirrored it across a mesh of decentralized systems, co-managed by other children who had once been part of Project Helix, Omega Stream, and Aria. All programs designed under the Price umbrella and its subsidiaries to harvest talent and suppress individuality. And now, those same minds, once tools, had become shields, guardians, architects of a new reality. And as the media swarmed her for comment, Zara refused all podiums. Instead, releasing a 12-minute open-source lecture streamed through the Academy's public channel, where she detailed not the crimes, but the systems behind them, how institutions dress control as care, how numbers replace names, and how brilliance, when feared, becomes a threat to those who have built power through mediocrity. And her words didn't inspire just sympathy. They ignited strategy, and soon, educators, coders, civil rights lawyers, and students across the globe joined what came to be known as the Ring Protocol, a coalition dedicated to locating, protecting, and empowering children with unacknowledged gifts, especially those in rural, impoverished, and conflict zones, because Zara understood something no textbook could teach, that the next battle would not be fought in courts or conferences, but in data fields, classroom policies, and who gets to decide what genius looks like. And so, when she received an encrypted message traced to an anonymous node in Eastern Europe containing partial access codes to what had once been Project Prometheus, the oldest and most dangerous of all the high-price experiments, she gathered her advisory board, now composed entirely of youth between ages 12 and 20, and said 6 words that sent chills through the underground resistance channel. We finish what they tried to bury, and with that, the Mitchell Innovation Academy evolved again not just as a place of learning, but as a command center for global justice through design, merging engineering with advocacy, empathy with infrastructure. And soon, small outposts began to appear in Lagos, Mumbai, São Paulo, and the Navajo Nation. Each one adapted to local culture, but rooted in the same philosophy: no child should ever fear their own potential. And as the first international delegation of recovered children arrived in North Carolina to tour the site where it all began, Zara met them not with a speech, but with an invitation handing each child a toolkit with the words engraved on the handle: Builder, not subject. And together under the same roof that had once hidden Elena's cries in the night, they began drawing not memories but inventions: solar water, purifiers, collapsible shelters, neurosensitive prosthetics. And on the wall behind them, a massive mural slowly came to life, painted by survivors and students alike, depicting not Zara, not Logan, not even the ring, but a tree growing out of steel roots breaking through cement, and in each branch, names, first names, unclassified. Finally free, and when Logan stood before it that evening, fingers tracing the painted veins of color, he turned to Zara and asked, "Did you ever think it would go this far?" And she replied, "No. But I knew it had to, because fire when started by pain can burn everything down. But fire when lit by truth can warm the future." And this fire, sparked by a little girl on the side of a hot rural road, fixing a stranger's car, had become the light by which the world began to see itself differently. 5 years to the day since Zara Mitchell first stopped on that forgotten stretch of Southern Road and changed the trajectory of an empire with nothing more than a toolkit and the memory of a mother's quiet defiance, the grounds of the Mitchell Innovation Academy thrummed with life, not in celebration of what had been undone, but in tribute to what had been built in its place. And as children from every continent explored the solar canopies, machine learning gardens, and empathy-coded AI labs surrounding the newly completed global wing, a single plaque gleamed near the entrance in 13 languages, etched with the words, "No child was born to be a weapon," and nearby, in a sun-drenched room filled with archives, blueprints, and student patents, Zara stood before the original ring, now encased in diamond glass, no longer a tool or a hiding place, but a symbol of transformation, a relic from the war between exploitation and hope. And behind her, Logan entered silently, his once commanding stride, now softened by time and clarity, holding in his hands the final declassified document from the Department of Defense regarding Project Prometheus, stamped with a red seal, terminated permanently. And when he passed it to Zara, she didn't smile or celebrate. She simply nodded, knowing that closure is not a door slammed shut, but one carefully sealed, so others can no longer be pulled through it and outside. As the Academy prepared to host its largest gathering, yet 1,200 young innovators, survivors, mentors, and global changemakers, Zara walked the paths her mother once feared to tread, pausing near the sculpture of the spiral hands where new names were now being added every year. Names once buried in system files, now spoken aloud in classrooms, in policy meetings, in parliaments. And when she stepped up to the open stage beneath a canopy of green solar leaves and hummingbird drones, she didn't speak as a founder or a savior, but as a peer, as someone still learning, still grieving, still creating. And her voice rang out clear across the grounds as she said, Elena Mitchell was not a revolutionary. Not by design, she was a nurse who chose to save one life, and that act became a pattern, a signal, a legacy, and everything we've done here, everything we're still doing, is because one person refused to let a lie become her child's truth. And in the crowd, seated beside Calvin and Tasha, a quiet boy clutched a model of a thermal-powered hover lens he had designed from watching the way. Leaves trembled in cold wind and whispered, "I think I'm ready to tell my story now." And in that moment, a cycle broke again, because courage is contagious and the future does not arrive with thunder. It arrives in whispers like that one. And as the sun dipped behind the ridge and the drone cameras drifted overhead, capturing the mosaic of movement below, the live broadcast reached its final moment, zooming in, not on Zara, but on the arch above the courtyard's gate, where a new banner had been unfurled, stitched by students whose hands once trembled in underground labs, and it read, "From stolen voices. We composed a symphony, and in a distant prison cell in Arizona, Richard Price sat alone, a man no longer feared, no longer followed, watching the screen flicker with the face of the child he once tried to erase, and behind him, the guards spoke of her not as an anomaly, but as the future, and he said nothing because for the first time in his life, he had nothing left to say. And back at the academy, Zara turned off the lights in the East Lab herself that night, walking the halls slowly, her reflection framed in each panel of glass. Not as a myth or symbol, but as proof, living, flawed, relentless, that justice when fueled by invention and grace doesn't just break systems, it builds what comes after and outside. The wind rustled the trees planted by the first class of graduates now towering above the rooftop turbines, their roots deep, their branches unafraid, because they, like her, had grown beyond the cage, and the story, her story. Their story was no longer a secret hidden in a ring. It was a movement inscribed into the bones of a new world. They thought she was just another orphan. They thought her story had ended the day her mother disappeared. They thought a ring was just jewelry, not a key to the empire they built on silence. But they were wrong. Zara Mitchell didn't just survive the system. They watched her dismantle it, brick by brick, code by code, name by name. She didn't ask for revenge, she demanded truth. And in doing so, she didn't just rewrite her past. She built a future for thousands like her. A future where no child is cataloged, no genius is owned, and no voice is forgotten. If this story moved, you reminded you of the power of resilience, or made you question who really gets to decide what a legacy means. Like this video, share it with someone who still believes in quiet revolutions, and subscribe to join us in telling more stories that matter. Because sometimes the smallest act of courage, the twist of a ring, the sound of a voice can change everything. And this time, the world was listening.